How is a kingdom won? Is it forged in the shadows of a dangerous childhood, where a boy with no title learns to survive? Is it won on the waves of a great invasion, a daring gamble to cross a treacherous sea? Or is it built with stone and fear, a crown held in place by an iron fist? Perhaps a kingdom is truly won when every man, every field, and every coin is known to its master. This is the story of a bastard who became a conqueror. Echoes of Genius, William the Conqueror. Chapter 1. The Bastard Duke. He was the son of a great duke, but not of his wife. In an age defined by bloodlines, William of Normandy began his life as a stain on a noble house, a bastard. Seeking salvation, his father left for a holy pilgrimage, entrusting his only son to the loyalty of his barons. It would be a fatal miscalculation. The news arrived like a death warrant. The duke was dead, and Normandy, without a strong ruler, was a prize for the taking. Instantly, the duchy descended into anarchy. Ambitious lords and treacherous relatives saw not a boy to protect, but a title to steal. For the child duke, the stone halls of his own castles were no longer a home, but a hunting ground, and he was the prey. In the shadows, his own kin plotted his demise. His illegitimate birth gave them the excuse. Their endless ambition gave them the motive. One by one, those loyal to him were assassinated. His protectors, his tutors. Even the man who shared his bed for safety was murdered in his sleep. His childhood was not one of lessons and games, but of frantic escapes in the dead of night, learning survival at the edge of a sword. He learned early that a title meant nothing without power, finding more safety in the hovels of peasants than in the halls of his own court. Everywhere he looked, the symbols of his own duchy, the very helmets of Norman knights, became the face of the enemy. But this brutal childhood did not break him. It forged him. Every attempt on his life hammered him into something harder, sharper. A weapon. When he came of age, he returned to his court not as a boy seeking protection, but as a lord demanding fealty. The hunted had become the hunter. He proved his right to rule not with words, but with steel. On the battlefield, the bastard began to earn a new name with blood. He learned the most vital lesson of the medieval age in the mud and chaos of war. That power is never given, it is taken. He developed a genius for warfare, a cold, calculating mind that saw victory where others saw only bloodshed and chaos. And to those who defied him, he showed a terrifying new ruthlessness. He made it clear that loyalty was a command and treason, a death sentence. Slowly, brutally, he stitched his fractured duchy back together. One castle, one victory, one dead rival at a time. He learned the art of politics, a deadlier game than war-forging alliances, not from friendship, but from sheer necessity. He had finally brought peace to Normandy. The brutal, violent peace of a man who has eliminated all his enemies. With his home finally secure, the boy who is never supposed to rule looked south, his gaze fixed on a new prize across the water, a kingdom. Chapter 2. The Conquest of 1066. Across the Channel in England, a crisis was brewing. King Edward the Confessor was old, pious, and childless. The future of the English crown was dangerously uncertain. William of Normandy, a distant kinsman, claimed that future was his. He alleged that King Edward himself had promised him the throne of England. Then, in 1064, fate intervened. England's most powerful earl, Harold Godwinson, was shipwrecked by a storm and washed ashore in Normandy directly into Duke William's hands. William treated the earl as an honored guest. But both men understood the reality. Harold was a valuable hostage, a pawn in a much larger game for a kingdom. Before his release, Harold was made to swear a solemn, binding oath. Upon holy relics, he pledged to support William's claim to the English throne. It was an oath he had no intention of keeping. 2 years later, King Edward died. The throne was now empty, and Harold was left with a choice: honor his sacred oath to a foreign duke, or seize power for himself. He chose power. In a stunning act of betrayal, Harold Godwinson had himself crowned King of England, defying his oath, his honor, and the powerful Duke of Normandy. The news reached William like a declaration of war. The insult was not just political, 'twas a personal betrayal, a sin against God, and it would be answered with fire and steel. He rallied his barons, framing his cause not as a conquest, but as a holy crusade to punish a perjurer, an endeavor sanctioned by the Pope himself. The command was given. An entire forest was felled to build a massive invasion fleet, a flotilla of unprecedented size designed to carry an army across the sea. The forges of Normandy burned day and night. An army was being born from iron and fire, equipped for the brutal task of conquering a kingdom. William's genius was not just in battle, but in logistics. He prepared to transport not just soldiers, but his most devastating weapon, the armored Norman warhorse. But after months of preparation, the entire invasion was held hostage by a single, invisible force. The wind, the army was ready, but the sea was not. For weeks, William and his thousands of men could do nothing but wait and pray, their grand ambition depending entirely on the mercy of the heavens. And then it came, a favorable wind from the north. To the Normans, it was more than just a change in weather. 'Twas a divine signal. God was on their side. The great invasion finally set sail. A floating city of over 700 ships carrying the destiny of England on the waves of the Channel. At the head of the fleet stood William, a man whose entire life had been a battle for legitimacy. Now he was sailing to claim the ultimate prize. After a long and perilous crossing, they saw it. The coast of England, the promised land ripe for the taking. The Norman army landed unopposed at Pevensey. Thousands of knights, archers, and soldiers stormed the beaches, the first successful foreign invasion in centuries. As he stepped ashore, William stumbled. But in a moment of brilliant political theater, he turned a terrible omen into a prophecy. Shouting by the splendor of God, "I have taken England with both my hands." In the north of England, King Harold was celebrating a stunning victory over an army of Vikings. But the celebration was cut short. A new, more dangerous enemy had landed in the south, already exhausted from one war. Harold's army was forced into a grueling 250-mile march south to face another. The fate of England would rest on the shoulders of tired men. But the Anglo-Saxons held one great advantage: the high ground. On a ridge near Hastings, they formed a near-impenetrable shield wall, a fortress of wood, steel, and courage. Below them, William's Norman army looked up. They had archers and, crucially, a force of some 2,000 heavily armored knights. But they would have to charge uphill. Before the battle, William reminded his men of Harold's broken oath, framing the conflict not as a conquest, but as a righteous judgment, blessed by God. The battle began with a Norman assault. A storm of thousands of arrows, fired by William's archers, meant to break the discipline of the English line. But the arrows fell harmlessly against the high-held shields. The Saxon wall held firm, a testament to its strength and the resilience of its men. The Norman infantry charged next, surging up the steep hill, only to be met by a meat grinder of swinging battle axes and jabbing spears, and were thrown back in bloody disarray. For a moment, the Norman attack faltered. A rumor spread like wildfire through the ranks. William was dead. Panic began to set in, and the lines started to break. But the Duke was very much alive. In a pivotal moment of leadership, he rode before his men, helmet raised to show his face, proving he was still with them, ready to lead them to victory. With his army's morale restored, William unleashed his masterstroke. He ordered a contingent of his knights to stage a feigned retreat, pretending to flee the battlefield in chaos. The trap was sprung. Believing the Normans were beaten, a part of the English line broke formation, charging down the hill in a fatal, undisciplined pursuit. The fleeing knights suddenly wheeled their horses around, trapping the exposed English on level ground. far from the protection of their shield wall. It was the opening William had been waiting for all day. He unleashed his main cavalry force, which now smashed like a tidal wave into the breach in the Saxon line. The effect was devastating. The awesome power of the armored knight on horseback against unprotected infantry began to turn the tide of the entire battle. Yet the English fought on with incredible bravery. For hours, the field was a chaotic stalemate of charge and countercharge as the sun began its descent. With the light failing, William ordered his archers to fire one last time, aiming high, so the arrows would plunge down like deadly rain upon the English king and his elite guard. Legend tells that it was this volley that sealed England's destiny. King Harold, looking to the sky, was struck down, an arrow piercing his eye. Wounded and blinded, the king was helpless. A small group of Norman knights broke through his royal guard and cut him down. The King of England was dead. With their king slain, the English army lost all hope. They broke and fled. As the sun set on the field of carnage, William the Bastard stood victorious. He was now the Conqueror. Chapter 3. The Iron King. The Battle of Hastings was won. But William knew the victory was not an end. It was the beginning of a much harder war. The war for the soul of England. His strategy was not to attack London directly, but to strangle it. He carved a bloody path of terror around the capital, burning towns to show the price of resistance. Fear was his most effective weapon. He sent a clear message to the English. He had not come to negotiate. He had come to rule. The tactic worked. To save their city from destruction, the leaders of London surrendered, reluctantly offering the crown of England to the man at their gates. On Christmas Day, 1066, William entered Westminster Abbey to be crowned a legitimate king in a ceremony intended to unite his Norman and English subjects. But the two peoples did not even speak the same language. When the English inside shouted their acclamation, the nervous Norman guards outside heard only the roar of rebellion. They panicked, and in their fear, they set fire to the city, turning a sacred coronation into a scene of chaos and violence. William was crowned King of England while his new capital burned around him. A terrible omen for the brutal, fiery reign that was to come. But the English people would not be so easily tamed. Across the country, and especially in the rugged north, rebellions erupted, refusing to bow to a foreign king. For years, a savage guerrilla war raged. English rebels fought desperately from forests and fens to reclaim their land from the Norman occupiers. Finally, William's patience shattered. Faced with constant defiance, he decided upon a final, terrifying solution to break the English spirit forever. It would be known as the Harrowing of the North. Not a battle, but a state-sponsored famine. His armies were ordered to burn everything. Crops, livestock, homes, and granaries were all put to the torch. The land was made barren, and the people were left to starve through the harsh winter. It is estimated that over 100,000 men, women, and children died. The north of England was reduced to a silent, desolate wasteland, a monument to William's wrath. With the rebellions crushed by starvation, William began to stamp his authority into the very stone of the land. He launched a massive castle-building program. These were not palaces. They were fortresses. The Tower of London and hundreds like it were built as permanent symbols of Norman dominance and English subjugation. He systematically dispossessed the native Anglo-Saxon aristocracy, seizing their lands and giving them to his loyal Norman barons. In a single generation, he replaced an entire ruling class, imposing a new, strict feudal order upon the English people, forever changing the structure of society. The language of power and the court became Norman French. The language of the conquered peasants became English. A deep cultural divide was carved into the heart of the nation. William had finally achieved total control. But he ruled not by love or loyalty, but by absolute power and fear. He was no longer just the conqueror. He was the Iron King of a broken land. Chapter 4. The Domesday Legacy. William's conquest had made him one of the wealthiest and most powerful kings in Europe. But his greed was insatiable. He wanted to know the value of every field, every pig, every man in his new kingdom. And so, in 1085, he commissioned his final great act, the Domesday Book, a great survey of his entire kingdom on a scale never before attempted in Europe. His royal commissioners spread out across the land, a legion of accountants and scribes sent to measure and catalog every single inch of England. Under oath, villagers and priests were forced to reveal every detail of their lives: how many plows they owned, how many acres they farmed, what their land was truly worth. It was a meticulous, intrusive, and deeply resented accounting, an inventory of a conquered nation designed for one primary purpose: more effective taxation. No one could hide from the book's gaze. Its knowledge was absolute. To the English people, it was a symbol of their total subjugation, their final judgment. The result was a masterpiece of medieval administration, a perfect tool for a king who wished to control everything, and it was brutally effective. The Domesday Book allowed William's government to squeeze his new kingdom for every last penny it was worth. But history has a strange irony. The tyrant's tool for taxation accidentally became a priceless treasure for civilization, the single most detailed snapshot of life in the Middle Ages. As he grew older, the great warrior became a prisoner of his own success and his own body. But his ambition and his capacity for violence never faded. On one last campaign in France, he led the sack and burning of the city of Mantus, showing the same ruthlessness he had possessed as a young man. But it was here that his story took its final, ironic turn. A stumble of his horse, a sudden impact against his saddle, and the great conqueror suffered a fatal internal wound. Even on his deathbed, there was no peace. His own sons were already fighting over his inheritance, eager for the old king to finally die. And when he did, he was abandoned. The man who commanded thousands, who had seized a kingdom, was stripped of his belongings by his own servants and left alone on the floor. His burial was arranged not by a duke or a bishop, but by a simple knight who took pity on the abandoned body of his lord. Fire and chaos, which had marred his coronation, returned to haunt his funeral. A chaotic, undignified end for a man of such immense power. At his burial, one final grotesque indignity awaited the conqueror. His bloated body, too large for its stone tomb, ruptured during the ceremony, filling the church with a foul stench. A shockingly ignoble end to a formidable life. But his legacy was indestructible. He left behind a new language, a new ruling class, a new architecture of power, and a nation forever pulled away from Scandinavia and into the orbit of Europe. He was a bastard, a survivor, a conqueror, and a king. Neither a hero nor a simple villain, but a brutal and brilliant force of history whose echo reshaped the world.